Noon heat pressed over Willow Bend's farmer's market as Veronica Carter's hand rose again. Crates of peaches turned into a jury that wouldn't look up. A couple of Ava Carter's classmates froze by the lemonade stand. Their parents stared through her. Dust hung like held breath. Then boots hit gravel beside an old Ford. "Don't touch her, sell her to me," Ethan Cole called, voice flat enough to cut the heat. The square went still. A church bell counted noon. No one counted blows. Jolene Hart's whisper skittered like a lizard under boards. Two deacons watched and did nothing. A belt hovered midair, trembling over Ava's shoulder. Veronica smiled the way a knife does. "Sell? Take her," she said, jerking Ava by the elbow. "Useless thing." A vendor looked away, polishing apples that were already clean. A child asked a mother why nobody helped. The mother hushed her, eyes on the pavement. Silence partnered the guilty like a handshake. Ava's knees were gravel-burned, palms dusty where she'd caught herself. A purple welt darkened beneath her jaw. The market's sun-bleached bunting fluttered without nerve enough to shade her. She didn't ask for rescue. She only pressed her lips together, the way you do when there's nothing safe left to say. Ethan stepped closer, set his hat brim straight, and didn't look at Veronica again. He looked only at Ava, the way you look down a road you might take. "You can walk," he said, not touching her. "Or not." His words were plain enough to be a door. He left it open. Veronica snorted, tossed the belt into a crate like last night's trash. "You owe me nothing," she said too loudly, so the square would hear her generosity. Someone snickered. Someone filmed a second, then lowered their phone when Ethan didn't perform. The crowd's courage measured out at exactly 0. Ava tested her legs. The first step felt stolen from a locked box. She lifted her chin a thumb's width and found Ethan already turning, already moving, as if the earth asked for proof before it offered distance. He didn't check if the crowd approved. He checked only that the road existed. They passed Jolene Hart, pencil already working a notepad like a fiddle bow. "Farmer bought himself a wife," she breathed to the woman beside her, feeding the square a story sweeter than truth. The woman nodded as if nodding could be kindness. It wasn't. It was a receipt stamped complicit. A boy from church youth group stared at his sneakers. His father, who once promised to stand for what's right, counted change at his stall, back carefully turned. Friends weren't friends. Parents weren't parents. Witnesses rehearsed being furniture. Even the flag above the courthouse hung without wind, practicing neutrality. Ethan never touched Ava. He walked ahead like a metronome, boots finding rhythm, leaving space exactly her size. The Ford's passenger door stayed closed. Main Street unspooled. Barber pole, hardware store, a hand-painted sign that squeaked on its hinge. The town's eyes tracked them, and then, for safety, pretended not to. At the corner, a gust flipped the blue awning and scattered flyers for the drought relief raffle. One slapped Ava's ankle, a picture of a dry well. She bent, peeled it off, and for a half-second met Ethan's eyes. He looked away first, as if courtesy could be armor. "Room, water, bread," he said without turning, the syllables arranged like planks across a ditch. She didn't answer. Her throat was smoke, but her feet learned the tempo of following a person who wasn't pushing. Birds startled from the power lines and stitched the sky back together with thin black thread. Behind them, the square reassembled its face, voices climbing back to market volume, boxes shifting, coins clinking, lies fixing themselves into a story that could be told at supper. Ahead, the road out of town narrowed to 2 long stripes of dust bordered by cottonwoods. The town did nothing. The road did the only honest thing: it opened. The farmhouse door gave way with a groan, the kind of sound tired wood makes when it's been holding secrets too long. Inside smelled of flour still warm from the oven and cedar smoke that clung to the rafters. Ethan didn't linger. He set a lamp on the dresser, pointed once. "Room, water, bread." Then he stepped back out into the night. Ava stood in the doorway, one foot on the porch, the other still in dust. She touched the frame as if it might vanish if she leaned too hard. Her palms were raw, the skin cracked, but the sheet on the bed was clean, folded corners sharp as if someone cared how things looked when nobody was watching. She lowered herself onto the edge, fingers trembling over the fabric like it was glass. For the first time in years, her body loosened. No orders barked, no blows waiting if she closed her eyes too soon. She lay back slowly, shoes still on, staring at a ceiling that didn't drip with insults. Her lips parted but no sound came. In that hush, a vow shaped itself inside her chest, quiet but solid. I'll get my name back. Outside, crickets tuned the night. The screen door clicked shut behind Ethan, boots moving across gravel with the rhythm of a man who carried too many thoughts to say out loud. He leaned on the post, hat in hand, staring at a sky where stars blinked uncertain through thin clouds. The fields needed rain. His own heart needed something he didn't know how to name. When dawn rolled in, the light stretched long across the porch. Ava was already moving. She swept the boards, the straw broom scratching in steady strokes. Her shoulders hunched at first, then eased as the dust lifted in little clouds. She worked without being told, the habit of survival shaping each movement. But there was something else now. A fraction more steadiness in the way she straightened. A sliver of space between the girl who bowed her head at the market and the one who now held it an inch higher. Ethan passed on his way to the barn, carrying feed. He didn't pause, but his eyes caught the sight. The broom pushing, the girl breathing in air that smelled of wet earth and ash. He kept walking, yet in that glance something shifted. Small as a nail tapped into fresh wood. Behind them the town was already talking. But here, in this quiet pocket of land, the first step had been taken. Not loud, not dramatic, just a girl closing her eyes on clean sheets and waking to sweep dust off a porch that wasn't hers. Yet. By midweek, the market square buzzed louder than the cicadas. Jolene Hart had already planted her version of the story on 3 porches and a church bench. "Farmer bought himself a wife," she whispered, and the words spread like spilled kerosene. Folks nodded, smirked, then added their own seasoning. Some said Ethan wanted a servant. Others laughed that he couldn't handle a real woman, so he settled for a broken girl. Ava heard fragments everywhere. At the well, 2 women turned their backs mid-sentence. At the mercantile, a clerk slid her change across the counter with 2 fingers, careful not to touch her skin. Even silence felt sharp. She carried groceries home with her chin tucked, fighting the weight of eyes that refused to see her whole. That evening, Ethan set a loaf of bread on the table. Steam still curled from its crust. He didn't announce it, didn't explain. Ava waited until he left the room, then tore off a piece with careful hands as if it might vanish. Chewing slow, she studied the empty chair across from her. The quiet between them wasn't cold anymore. It felt like a rope stretched thin, but holding. Later, under the porch light, Ethan leaned against the post, arms folded. "They're saying I bought you," he said finally, his voice steady as gravel under boots. Ava froze, throat tight. The words stung worse than a slap. Ethan let the silence sit, then shook his head. "I bought your freedom, not you." Her chest rose once, shallow. She didn't answer, but the words lodged deep, something she would hold like a coin hidden in her pocket. That night he phoned a contact 2 counties over, a man who knew how to read courthouse files and dig through pawn slips. Ethan's voice was low, clipped. "There might be grounds for guardianship transfer, abuse, debts, theft. I'll bring evidence." He ended the call with a hand pressed hard against the table, knuckles white. Next morning, Ava found another wildflower in a chip jar by the bread. Yellow petals bright against the wood, a tiny rebellion against all the names people had pinned on her. She touched it with the tip of one finger, careful not to crush it. For the first time, she lifted her head when passing a neighbor, and though they looked away, she kept walking, steady. The first cough came at dawn. Ava pressed her sleeve to her lips and kept working, but by noon her legs shook under her. She set the broom aside, leaned on the porch rail, and the world tilted. Ethan found her there, cheeks burning red, eyes glassy. She tried to wave him off, but her knees buckled, and he caught her elbow before she hit the floorboards. By night her skin burned hot as coals. The little room smelled of sweat and damp cloth. Ethan dipped rags into a bucket of cool water, wrung them out with rough hands, and laid them across her forehead. He swapped one for another, over and over, listening to her breath rattle. He wasn't trained, but he stayed. His chair scraped close to the bed, and he didn't leave. When fever dreams pulled her under, she mumbled half-words. Her fingers twitched, reaching for something that wasn't there. Ethan leaned close. "You're safe here," he said, voice low. Nobody's going to touch you. The words floated in the dim lamplight, steady as prayer. She didn't answer, but her hands stilled. Hours crawled. He watched the rise and fall of her chest, each breath shallow, each one a fight. When the cloth grew warm, he changed it. When her lips cracked, he spooned in a little broth. Steam rose, and he coaxed her to swallow. The night outside hummed with crickets, but inside only her coughing mattered. At one point, when her eyes opened halfway, he asked permission. "We need proof," he said, holding up the old camera. She gave the faintest nod, and he took the picture of the bruises fading down her arms. Evidence, not shame. He set the camera aside and pulled the blanket higher. By dawn, the fever broke. Ava's hair stuck to her face, damp with sweat, but her breathing had steadied. Ethan slumped forward, head resting on his arms at the edge of her bed. When she stirred, she saw him there, asleep but ready, as if even in rest he refused to leave his post. That afternoon, sunlight poured across the porch. On a chair in her room lay a folded bundle of fabric, blue cotton scattered with tiny white flowers. Simple but new. She touched it with hesitant fingers, hardly believing it was hers. Ethan's voice carried from the kitchen, calm and sure. "You're worthy of choice," he said. Then he went quiet, leaving the words to settle like seed in fresh earth. The morning after the fever broke, Ethan spread papers across the kitchen table. Old pawn slips, scribbled receipts, a faded envelope with Ava's mother's name scratched in pencil. Each piece told a story of money skimmed, keepsakes stolen, and nights when whiskey cost more than food. Ava sat across from him, hands folded tight, eyes fixed on the envelope. They spent hours retracing the trail. A neighbor brought over a note saying she remembered the bruises and the shouting. Another, the shopkeeper, signed a statement about Veronica pawning off the locket that once belonged to Ava's mother. Each word on paper felt heavier than the last, but together they formed a spine. Evidence. Ava's breath caught when she saw her mother's locket listed in neat ink, reduced to a ticket number. She whispered, almost to herself, "She sold even that." Ethan didn't answer. He slid the paper closer, steady hands, then wrote down the date. His silence wasn't neglect. It was steel. That evening, Veronica barged into the yard, skirt snapping like a flag in the wind. "You think you've rescued her?" She laughed, voice sharp enough to cut bark from a tree. "Take her then. She's useless. Let's see how long before you throw her back." The words cracked like a whip, but Ethan didn't flinch. He only turned away, shoulders squared, as if her laughter was no louder than a crow in the distance. 2 days later, Ethan walked up the courthouse steps. The air smelled of dust and paper, the kind that clings to walls that have heard too many broken stories. He filed for guardianship transfer, his name inked beside Ava's in black letters that made it real. The clerk stamped the papers, the sound sharp and final, like a gavel in miniature. A restraining order followed, the ink still wet. Ava stood outside by the truck, the afternoon sun pressing hot on her shoulders. When Ethan handed her the copy, she traced the seal with one finger. It wasn't freedom yet, but it was a door cracked open. She folded the paper carefully, tucked it into her pocket, and for the first time allowed herself to breathe deeper. Behind them, the sky darkened with clouds that carried no rain. The drought had settled heavy over Willowbend. Wells ran low, and cattle bellowed restless. People muttered that the fields might not make it through the season. But Ava held that paper close. For her, a different season had already begun. By late July, the soil cracked wide, lines running through the fields like old scars. The river shrank into a muddy trickle, and cattle stood nose to the ground, bellowing low from thirst. Drought had its own way of stripping people down, and Willowbend felt meaner with each dry day. At the well outside the church, 2 women whispered while drawing buckets. "He even serves her coffee," one said, letting the rope slip slow through her hands. "Maid or wife? Hard to tell." Their laughter clattered against the stone walls and carried down the street. Ava heard it, stiffened, then kept walking with her head forward. The words landed, but they didn't stick the way they once had. In town, Jolene Hart leaned over her bolts of cloth at the seamstress's bench, voice sweet but sharp. "I saw her sweeping his porch like she owns the place. Funny how quick a stray dog learns comfort." The others chuckled, stitching needle through fabric, eyes darting like they'd just heard gospel. Ethan, fixing a broken corral fence with Mr. Cum, overheard another jab float from across the road. Farmer's lost his mind, bought a girl instead of a cow. His hammer came down harder, nails biting deep into the wood. He said nothing, but the rhythm of the blows drowned out the insult. That evening, he found Ava on the porch with the broom again, sweeping dust into a neat line. He stood at the steps, hat in hand, and spoke without looking directly at her. "They're saying I bought a wife." The words came flat, no tremor, no drama. Ava froze, bristles still against the boards. Her face flushed hot, shame rushing back like a tide. Bought. The words stung all over again. Ethan leaned on the post, let the silence breathe, then answered himself. "I bought your freedom. Nothing more." His tone was steady, like he was stating the weight of a sack of grain. Truth, not defense. Ava didn't trust her voice, so she only nodded. But in that nod, a corner shifted. Respect took root where only fear had lived before. The next morning, she found another jar on the kitchen table. Inside, a single wildflower stood tall in a splash of water, yellow bright against chipped glass. It said more than words ever could. "I see you. I choose to." And for the first time, Ava walked through town without folding her shoulders inward. The whispers didn't stop, but her steps no longer bent beneath them. Saturday afternoon, the market was crowded, stalls buzzing under the weight of drought talk. Ethan walked slow past a vendor selling seed and flour when a splash of blue caught his eye. A dress, simple cotton scattered with white flowers, swayed on a hanger in the hot wind. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't costly, but it was beautiful in the way of quiet things. He bought it without a word, folded it careful, and carried it home. No speech, no explanation. He left it on the chair by her bed and walked away. Ava found it near dusk. Her fingers hovered before she touched it, afraid it might vanish. The fabric felt too fine for her calloused hands. She held it up to the window light, heart thudding, then folded it fast and tucked it deep in the drawer. The air in the room felt tight, almost guilty, as if beauty didn't belong there. That night, while tending the stove, Ethan spoke with his back to her. "If you don't want to wear it, that's fine. But I want you to know, you deserve nice things." The words landed heavy. She flushed, staring at the floor. "I'm not worthy of that," she whispered, voice cracking. He turned, wiped his palms on a rag. "You're worthy of respect and of choice." That was all. Then he went quiet again, letting the fire fill the space. Ava lay awake long after, eyes fixed on the ceiling, his words echoing like footsteps across an empty hall. Respect, choice. She rolled them over and over, each syllable both strange and sharp, like stones she had never held before. Days later, on a cloudy morning, she washed the dress by hand with ash soap, fingers gentle as prayer, hung it on the line, watched it sway. It looked almost like a flag, fragile, but declaring something. When she finally wore it, no ceremony marked the moment. She swept the porch barefoot, blue fabric brushing her ankles. Ethan came in from the fields, paused at the gate, and saw her. He didn't speak, but his gaze softened, steady as if he'd been waiting for this without knowing it. That evening, while putting jars away, she spoke almost to herself. "My mother liked dresses like this, blue with little flowers." Ethan didn't reply. He only swallowed, felt something twist inside, and let the silence honor her memory. And for the first time, Ava stepped outside into the dark, the blue dress catching the night breeze, her face lifted toward the stars without fear. The backyard had been left wild, weeds tall enough to hide old boards and broken wire. One gray morning, Ava went out with a basket, meaning only to clear the space. She pushed aside the brush, her hands scratched raw when she saw it. A single yellow flower, bright against the dirt, blooming where nothing should. She crouched down, arms wrapped around her knees, staring. Her lips moved before she realized. "My mother liked these," she whispered, voice catching on the word mother like it might crumble. The memory rose sharp, the way her mother used to tuck small blooms into her hair and call them blessings from the ground. Ava smiled then, a small, true curve of her mouth, the first in years. Ethan came back from the field at dusk, shirt damp with sweat, hoe slung over his shoulder. He stopped when he saw her kneeling there, fingers tracing the fragile stem. She looked up, startled, but didn't hide it. "It was her favorite," she said softly. "She used to say flowers like these only grow where the earth still has a heart." He crouched beside her without a word, pulled a pocket knife from his trousers, cut a square in the soil, and set the roots back deeper. "Let's plant it again," he said. Together they pressed the dirt, her hands trembling against his steady ones. Then she ran for water, poured it slow, and they both watched the flowers stand tall in the fading light. That night she hummed at the sink while scrubbing pots, a tune so quiet it almost blended with the wind outside. Ethan sat at the table listening. He didn't speak, didn't want the sound to break. He just let the melody run its course, a proof that something in her had cracked open and begun to heal. From then on, when she walked into town, her shoulders didn't fold. She still caught whispers, still saw eyes slide away, but she carried herself straighter. The yellow flower had taken root not just in the yard, but in her, a piece of the past, reclaimed and planted into the present. The sound of coughing came before the man appeared. It was rough, hollow, carried on the dry wind like a broken engine. At the edge of Willowbend's market, Daniel Carter stumbled forward, shoulders hunched under a worn bundle, a baby boy pressed to his chest. His skin was sunburned, his shirt torn, his eyes searching with the desperation of someone who had nowhere left to go. People recognized him. A few spat in the dust. Others turned their backs. No one offered water. He had once walked out of town without a glance at the daughter he left behind, and folks hadn't forgotten. Ethan stood near a seed stall, jaw tight. He knew that face. The man who traded blood for freedom. He didn't move closer. He only watched as Daniel shuffled toward the square, head bowed like a man already beaten. Hours later, a whistle sounded weak at the farm gate. Ethan was mending fence posts when he looked up. Daniel stood there, clutching the child. His voice was ragged. "They told me she's here. Ava, I just need a place to rest, a corner, a few days." Ethan crossed his arms, leaned on the post. His reply came slow, steady. "She's here, but she's not a voiceless girl anymore. She has a home. She has a name." The screen door creaked, and Ava stepped out. She wore the blue dress, faded now but still whole. Her gaze didn't tremble. She didn't rush. She only stood there tall and silent. Daniel's eyes widened, wet with recognition. The bundle on his chest squirmed and whimpered. "Ava!" he whispered, voice breaking. "My God, forgive me, I was wrong." His knees bent like he might fall, but she didn't move toward him. She looked at the child first, small fists curling in sleep, then at Ethan, who hadn't stepped aside. Finally, her eyes fixed on the man who had once walked away without a backward glance. Her voice was calm. "The boy needs food." She turned, went inside, and set a plate on the table. No hug, no tearful reunion, only a meal offered on a clean cloth. Daniel ate slow, shame thick as dust in his throat. By the time he looked up to speak, she was gone. That night he slept on the porch, wrapped around the child. Ethan brought out a blanket, dropped it beside him. "For the boy," he said, nothing more. By morning, Daniel was gone. No note, no promise. Just empty boards where he'd lain. Inside, Ava washed the dishes, movement steady. She didn't mention it. She didn't need to. Some pain doesn't shout. It just keeps moving, reshaping itself into strength. And in her silence that day, she was stronger than he had ever been. Late in the season, when the sky burned red at dusk and dust clung to every step, Veronica Carter returned. Not the same woman who once barked orders and raised her hand without shame. Her dress hung loose, threadbare, her hair tangled into ropes, her feet bare against the hot ground. Hunger bent her shoulders. Pride had already been stripped away. She stopped at the gate but didn't knock, just stood there, eyes lowered, waiting. Ava came out with flour still on her apron, the smell of bread following her. Their eyes met, and between them rose the weight of years, blows, insults, nights on the floor. Veronica's voice cracked. "I need food. I have nothing, nothing." Ava didn't answer. She turned, walked back into the kitchen, lifted the pot lid. Rice, beans, a small piece of roasted fish. She served it plain but full, covered the plate with a clean cloth, and carried it outside. She handed it over without a word. Veronica's fingers shook as she took it. She sat on the bench under the old tree, spoon moving slow, each bite laced with humiliation. The same mouth that once spat venom now swallowed silence. When she finished, she set the plate aside and whispered, almost to herself, "I don't know why you don't hate me." Ava's hand rested on the doorframe. She looked back once, steady and calm. Because whoever carries hate has no space left to plant peace. Then she stepped inside, leaving the words to linger in the air like smoke. Veronica rose, thin frame swaying, and walked down the dusty road. No one knows where she went. Only that day she left with less hunger in her body and more regret in her bones. That night, Ethan brought 2 cups of tea to the porch. He set one by her side. "Today," he said softly, "you showed more courage than most people find in a lifetime." Ava didn't reply. She only lifted her eyes to the dark sky. For the first time, she wasn't looking back. She was looking ahead. The drought stretched so long, the earth split like dry skin. Corn leaves curled at the edges. Beans barely clung to life. People in town muttered that nothing good would come that year. Wells dropped low, tempers shorter still. At night, the house stayed quiet, but Ava moved through it steady. She swept the floor like she was clearing a path. She folded cloths neat as if arranging pieces of her own life. In the yard, she planted flowers, even when the soil looked dead. Her hands worked like prayers, and Ethan noticed. One night, the air grew heavy. The wind carried the smell of dust and something else. Promise. The first drops hit the roof like tiny drums. Then the sky opened. Rain poured hard and sudden, soaking the ground, rattling the windows, washing the heat from the air. Ava stood at the doorway, frozen, watching the water flood the yard. The flowers bent but didn't break. She reached out, palm open, catching drops, her face tilted upward. It wasn't just rain. It was release. Ethan stepped onto the porch. He didn't move, didn't shield himself. Let the water soak through his shirt. Let it run down his face. He looked at her once, and she looked back. No words, just the sound of the storm, louder than anything they could have said. The week after, the fields woke up. Green spread fast, almost greedy. Corn rose tall, beans climbed, cassava sprouted strong. The baskets filled until they overflowed. Chickens fattened, cattle grew calm again. Neighbors came, wide-eyed, whispering about luck. The rain came just in time, they said. But Ethan knew better. Luck hadn't carried them. Peace had. The peace Ava sowed each day in silence, in care, in refusing to let bitterness rot the ground. That season, the farm didn't just survive, it thrived. And with it, so did she. One afternoon, the fields shimmered with heat, the air thick with the smell of wet soil. Ava's hands were black with dirt as she pulled weeds between rows of corn. Ethan carried a basket heavy with harvest. He set it down, straightened his back, and looked at her. She wiped her forehead, caught him watching. For once, she didn't drop her eyes. Instead, her voice came soft but steady. "Do you still want to buy me?" The question cut through the stillness. No anger in it, no fear. Just truth. The kind of truth that faces the past without bowing to it. Ethan paused, wiped his palms on his trousers, and met her gaze. "No," he said slowly. "Now I want to share life. But only if you want that too." For a moment, the field held its breath. Ava didn't rush to answer. Her lips curved into a smile that felt rooted, certain. She nodded once, and that was enough. Later, beneath the old oak tree by the house, they stood side by side. No silk, no rings, no crowd. Just clean cotton, bare feet, and neighbors gathered in silence. Old Mrs. Harlow, the midwife who had seen every birth and every burial in Willowbend, raised her hand in blessing. "May what began in pain grow in peace. May what was cast aside become a shelter wide enough for others." The words carried, not as ceremony, but as truth. And when Ava and Ethan met each other's eyes, there was no debt, no rescue, no chain, only choice. That evening, as the sun sank low, the house glowed warm with the smell of bread and rosemary. Ava sat on the porch with a book in her lap, a cloth wrapped in her hair. Ethan sat nearby, silent, listening to the night sounds. She whispered, almost to herself, "I thought I'd always be a servant. Today I'm a woman with my own name." Ethan didn't reply with words. He didn't have to. His presence was answer enough. And so the story that began with cruelty ended not with revenge, but with freedom. The kind built slow, like bread rising, like roots deepening in the earth. The kind no one could ever sell again. And that's the end of Ava and Ethan's story. One that began in pain but grew into peace, respect, and choice. If this story moved you, rate it from 1 to 10 in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring you more powerful stories just like this one.